term of the Anti-Imperialist means voice of dissent in Spanish-American War for the Philippines. The founders of the United States, who battled a revolution to terminate the country's position as a British colony, certainly never imagined that, a little more than a century later, the country would claim its own colonies. From this viewpoint, America's imperialism during and after the Spanish-American War, dubbed the Great Aberration, by some, is extremely shocking. As a result, it is unsurprising that a powerful resistance movement, the Anti-Imperialists, would arise. However, American imperialism in 1898 was not a sudden renunciation of anti-colonial heritage, but rather of natural extension of commercial development, which the U.S. had been undertaking throughout its history. The annexation of the Philippines violated the primary American ideal of legitimate government derived from consent of the governed, because the Filipinos desired independence. Secondly, and probably more than importantly, the anti-imperialists believed that having American territory in the Philippines would increase the likelihood of the U.S. being drawn into further conflict and war in Asia.
As we now know, the term voices of dissent emerged during the Spanish-American War period. While many supported the war, anti-imperialists were strongly in opposition. The Anti-Imperialist League was established in 1898, protesting against the U.S. annexation of the Philippines. Its most prominent include novelist Mark Twain, steel industrialist Andrew Carnegie, William James, David Starr Jordan, Samuel Gompers, and George S. Boswell. Early into the Spanish-American War, Mark Twain was actually a supporter of the United States. The Taylor Amendment promised to free Cuba. Twain saw the war as an unselfish effort for liberation. However, after the signing of the Paris Treaty in 1898, Twain was angered seeing as Spain has ceded Puerto Rico and Guam and southern Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million. In an interview with the New York Herald on 16 October 1900, Mark Twain declared, "I am an anti-imperialist," and thereafter he strongly supported the Filipinos, who were engaged in a guerrilla war against the U.S. Anti-imperialism in Britain had its origins when Adam Smith denounced the colonial system root and branch, going so far as to assert that it would be beneficial to the people of Great Britain as a whole if the colonies were abandoned. He definitely associated anti-imperialism with laissez-faire economics. Smith's contemporary Josiah Tucker wrote a number of tracts during the period of the American Revolution, the central idea of which, as stated by himself, was that the colonies, in quarreling with the mother country, are essentially hurting themselves and are greatly, though not intentionally, benefiting us by obliging us to see and pursue our own true and lasting interests. John A. Hobson wrote in Imperialism, a study published in 1902. The taproot of imperialism does not stem from nationalistic pride, but instead capitalist influence. As a form of economic institution, imperialism is unnecessary and immoral. The result of the misdistribution of wealth in a capitalist society, he believes that imperialism is not beneficial to anyone other than the higher class. He quotes, "Expansion of the empire appealed powerfully to the aristocracy and the professional classes by offering new and ever-growing field for the honorable and profitable employment for their sons."
Anti-Imperialism gained a viral currency after the Second World War and at onset of the Cold War as political movements in colonies of European powers promoted national sovereignty. Some anti-imperialist groups who oppose the United States support the power of Soviet Union, such as in Kataliya, while in Maoism, this was criticized as social imperialist. Marxism-Leninism is a communist ideology which was the main communist movement throughout the 20th century. Generally, Marxists and Leninists support proletarian internationalism and socialist democracy, and oppose anarchism, fascism, imperialism, and liberal democracy. Marxism and Leninism holds that the two-state communist revolution is needed to replace capitalism. In Southeast Asia, in Dutch Indonesia, there was no actual anti-imperialism. However, when it came out that some of the groups were not favored in the cultural system, especially among the Dutch businessmen and the humanitarians, they were joined together for economic liberalization. In British and Canada, anti-imperialism against the British emerged in the 1890s, especially from within the Liberal Party. Moderately active anti-imperial movements emerged in Canada and Australia. The French Canadians were hostile to British expansion, whereas in Australia, it was the Irish Catholics who were opposed. In India, anti-imperialism also grew rapidly and formed a core element of the demand by Congress for independence. Much of impetus came from colonial students studying at Oxford and Cambridge, such as Mahatma Gandhi.
Perhaps another so-called voice of dissent, although not having anything to do with the Spanish-American War, was British writer Eric Arthur Blair, or as we all know him as, George Orwell. He's known for his literary works on novels and essays. Moreover, one of his most notable essays was Shooting an Elephant. This essay is written as a narrative account of a British Imperial police officer stationed in Moulmein, Burma. The narrator describes the prevalent anti-European sentiment that fell among the Burmese townspeople. He expressed his hatred of imperialism and his job. He exclaims, "I was all for the Burmese and all against the oppressors, the British." He reveals the dirty work of the British Empire, and he describes this conflicted feeling of contempt for the empire and for the local people who made his job more difficult. One morning, the officer received a call from the police station. They reported that an elephant had gone must and was ravaging the market. The narrator was asked to deal with the situation. He notes, "These Burmese population had no weapons and were quite helpless against it." Afterwards, he found a corpse of an Indian laborer who had been trampled to death by the elephant. Following that situation, he requested an elephant rifle from a friend nearby. Upon receiving the rifle, the narrator had got hold of the elephant's whereabouts. As he marched through the town with his rifle, the locals excitedly followed him. They wanted to see the elephant's execution and hoped to get some of its meat. The narrator notes that the rifle was for self-defense and that he did not want to shoot the elephant, But as the crowd grew, his uncertainty also grew. He might have to shoot the creature. I perceived in this moment that when the white man turns tyrant, it is his own freedom that he destroys. As he arrived at the paddy field where the elephant was, he discovered that it had calmed down and looked no more dangerous than a cow. After watching its movements for a while, he noticed that the crowd had grown significantly bigger. He realized that there was nothing else he could do but shoot the elephant. He fired 3 shots until the elephant collapsed. Afterwards, the crowd rushed to the animal, but it was still not dead. He fired 2 more shots at its heart. He describes the elephant's agonizing death as he fired 1 last shot. He left the scene daunted and later heard that it took the elephant half an hour to die. Following the incident, both the locals and the police officers had divided opinions on the shooting of the elephant. The protagonist finally remarks, "I often wondered whether any of the others grasped that I had done it solely to avoid looking a fool."
The story, Shooting an Elephant, is a symbolic literature that George Orwell have represented the situation of British imperialism within Burma. Not only the colonized Burmese are the victim, but following orders of the empire and going against his own sense of morality just to impress the natives, Orwell have felt that himself is one of the victims that have been badly affected, not only physically, but mentally by the way of imperialism. We can explore the impression of feeling guilty but powerless thus indicates us the chaos within Orwell's heart. From the quote, "Theoretically and secretly, of course, I was always for the Burmese, and all against the oppressor, the British. As for the job I was doing, I hated more bitterly than I can perhaps make clear." Now, I would like to talk a little about critique of imperialism. The way of imperialism, whether it's going to be cultivating system or the violation of it, it is understandable that imperialism's highest goal is to seek for development. However, absolute control and violation in humans' resource can never be justified looking back from the present period. The same way that state security slowly altered to individual security. The way that communism and democracy is still fighting because we are living in a bipolar hierarchy world.
The story pointed out many metaphors between the British Empire and native Burmese in different ways and terms. Firstly, using an elephant as a metaphor was the main theme of this story. An elephant lambing up and destroying the village can be viewed at the beginning of British imperialism instability. British power in Burma began to be out of control. Although British imperialism was significantly influential in Burma, it had to come to the end or in decline as it was portrayed through the death of elephant. Nonetheless, 3 shots of shooting elephants can be viewed as 3 wars known as Anglo-Burmese Wars that the British and the Burmese had fought over each other. The death of elephants suggests a slow death of British power in Burma, which was being taken over. Through the lens of power, the British Empire did not hold absolute power in Burma because the Burmese people or the local authority has played a big part in their society too. To be more specific, violence or killing an elephant did not come from one side or other, but it was a result of both British power and the Burmese people.
Orwell, as a white man representative, had been expected from the locals to do things the way they wanted. At this point, a white man, implying British power, was being oppressed as a victim while they had oppressed others for imperialism. Without pressures and expectation from the local people, Orwell would not have shot an elephant. In other words, Orwell saw himself as a puppet in the show, and the one who controlled the puppet was the Burmese. Orwell also used a metaphor of imperialism. Being a police officer meant that he had to work for the British authority that oppressed to the native Burmese. His job is to follow the order and do what he has to do despite the rightness or wrongness, which was characterized by British imperialism.
The most notable quote in this essay, "When the white man turns tyrant, it is his own freedom that he destroys." The narrator expressed this thought as he prepared himself for the confrontation with the elephant. He further elaborates he becomes a sort of hollow, posing dummy, the conventional naturalized figure of Sahib, for it is the condition of his rule that he shall spend his life in trying to impress the natives. And so in every crisis he has got to do what the natives expect of him. He wears a mask and his face grows to fit it. I had got to shoot the elephant. The narrator ended up shooting the elephant. This shows us that how the narrator had become a tyrant. He acts as a puppet of those who are in charge, those being the British Empire's police force. In addition, the narrator acts as puppet by the will of the colonized people who acknowledge his position and ability to kill using the rifle. This emphasizes how Britain had destroyed its own freedom. By indulging in the empire, British goes against its values of personal liberty and democracy. Case in point, the narrator, despite his protest, carried out the execution, and therefore by shooting the elephant, he is going against his freedom and independent thoughts, morals, and actions. This highlights how negative and how brutal British imperialism is for everybody, even those in the control fall victim to its power.